They had been marching for 6 hours when the American camp appeared through the trees. 14 men, what remained of an infantry unit that had been retreating since March. Their officer had surrendered them at dawn. Hands up, weapons on the ground, the particular silence of men who have run out of options. They had heard enough stories about what came next. The stories were specific. They had been told by men who had not been there but were certain anyway. Certain about the beatings, the humiliation, the systematic cruelty of an enemy who had been fighting them for 4 years and would not have forgotten it. The stories had circulated through the unit for months, whispered in foxholes, passed from man to man like something solid that could be held onto when everything else was collapsing. So as the gates opened and the Americans moved them inside, each man was doing the same thing, watching, looking for the thing they had been told to expect, watching the guards' hands, watching the faces, waiting for the moment when processing became something else. The moment didn't come. An American sergeant with a clipboard counted them through the gate, one by one, in order, the way you count inventory. He said something to the translator after the last man was through. The translator said, "He wants your names and ranks. Start with the first man and work down the line." That was all. Names and ranks. No shouting, no rifle butts, no demonstration of who had won and who had lost. Just a man with a clipboard who wanted names in order. Nobody moved for a moment. Then the first man gave his name. His name was Richter. He was 32, a former postal worker from Dresden, who had been a soldier for 4 years without particularly wanting to be one. He had been good at it anyway, not because he had any gift for violence, but because he was methodical and reliable and followed instructions carefully, which were the qualities the army valued most in the men it used to move supplies and hold positions and do the 1,000 unremarkable things that kept a war functioning. He had survived 4 years by being unremarkable. He intended to survive captivity the same way. He gave his name. He gave his rank. He moved when he was told to move. He watched everything. The barracks they were taken to was at the eastern end of the compound, a long wooden building, plain, with 12 bunks along each wall and a stove in the center. The stove was already lit. Blankets were folded at the foot of each bunk. Not thick blankets, not luxurious, but real ones. The kind that held warmth. Richter sat on the edge of his bunk and held the blanket in both hands. He had been cold for 11 days. The retreat had not allowed for warmth. You moved or you didn't move, and warmth was something that happened to other people in other circumstances. Now he was sitting on a bunk in a heated room, holding a blanket, and the reality of it was taking a long time to process. The man beside him, a corporal named Weiss, young, who had been in the unit for only 6 weeks, said quietly, "Why is the stove lit?" Richter said, "Because it's cold." Weiss said, "But why would they?" He stopped. Richter said, "I don't know." This was the honest answer. He did not know. The stories had not covered this part. The stories had been thorough about the cruelty, and had said nothing about the stoves. At 6 o'clock, an American soldier came through the door carrying a large metal container. Behind him, another with a stack of tin bowls and a ladle. They set everything on the table near the entrance without ceremony. The first soldier said something. The translator said, "Evening meal. Help yourselves." Nobody moved. The American set the container on the table and left. Just left. No instruction. No guard position to watch. Just the food and the translator, and 14 German soldiers who had not moved. The translator said, patiently, "It's soup. It won't stay warm." Weiss was the first to stand. He was young enough that hunger had not yet learned to wait. He went to the table, took a bowl, ladled soup into it, and carried it back to his bunk. He sat down and looked at it for a moment. Then he ate. After that, the others went one by one. The soup was plain. Potatoes, some kind of grain, something that might have been vegetables at an earlier stage. It was not good soup, but it was hot, and there was enough of it, and nobody had said they could only have one bowl. Richter went back for a second. Nobody stopped him. He sat on his bunk with the second bowl and thought about the stories. The stories had been wrong. Not slightly wrong, substantially wrong. The beating at intake had not happened. The stripping of personal items had not happened. The deliberate cold had not happened. Instead, there had been a clipboard, a stove, blankets, and soup. He thought, either the stories were invented, or this camp is different from other camps, or something else is happening that I don't understand yet. He kept the third possibility open. He was a methodical man. That night he lay on his bunk and listened to the camp. Outside, a guard walked the perimeter. Regular footsteps, unhurried, the sound of someone doing a job rather than demonstrating authority. Inside the barracks, the other men settled into sleep one by one. The stove burned down slowly. The cold didn't come back. He did not sleep well. Not because he was uncomfortable. The bunk was thin but real, and the blanket was adequate, and the room was warm enough. He didn't sleep because sleeping required a level of trust in the immediate environment that he had not yet established. Every time he drifted toward sleep, he found himself listening for the sound that would confirm what he had been told to expect. The sound didn't come. At 6 in the morning, a guard opened the door and said something. The translator said, "Morning count. Outside in 5 minutes." They went outside. The count was done quickly. A head count, a name check, marks on a clipboard. Then breakfast in 20 minutes. Work assignments after. Richter looked at the guard. The man was young, 20, maybe 21, with the expression of someone doing a routine task for the 100th time. He was not watching them with hostility or satisfaction. He was watching them the way you watch a group of men you are responsible for moving from one place to another on a schedule. Breakfast was bread and something hot to drink. Richter drank it without complaining. It was warm. That was the relevant fact. The work assignments were posted on a board near the main building. Richter was assigned to road maintenance on the camp's eastern approach. He worked alongside 3 other prisoners and 2 American soldiers who handed out tools and showed them what needed doing, and then stepped back. One of the Americans worked alongside them for the first hour. Not supervising, working. He moved stones and filled gaps and did the same physical labor the prisoners were doing, which none of them had expected and none of them commented on. At midday there was a break. The American who had been working with them sat on a stone wall nearby and ate his own lunch. He said something to Richter as he passed. The translator said, "He asks where you're from." Richter said, "Dresden." The American said something. The translator said, "He says he's from Ohio. He doesn't know where Dresden is exactly, but he's heard of it." Richter said, "It's in Saxony, east of here." The translator repeated it. The American nodded. He went back to his lunch. That was the extent of the conversation. But Richter thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. The American had asked where he was from, not as interrogation, as conversation. The kind of thing you ask a man you are sitting near when the work has stopped for a moment. He had been a soldier for 4 years. Nobody on the other side had ever asked him where he was from. On the walk back to the barracks that evening, Richter passed the camp notice board. Posted beside the work assignments was a schedule, meal times, count times, a rest period on Sunday. He stopped and read it. Not because it contained surprising information, but because the existence of it surprised him. A schedule implied regularity. Regularity implied that tomorrow would be similar to today. For the first time in 11 days, tomorrow was something he could anticipate rather than simply endure. That evening, Weiss sat on his bunk and said, "I've been trying to understand it all day." Richter said, "Understand what?" We said, "Why they're doing this. The soup, the stove, the blankets. The man asking where you were from. Why?" Richter said, "I don't think there's one reason." We said, "There has to be." Richter said, "Maybe. But I've been looking for it all day, and I haven't found it. And I'm a methodical man." Weiss was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The stories were wrong." Richter said, "Yes." "Yes." Weiss said, "Completely wrong." Richter said, "Yes." Weiss looked at the stove. It had been refueled during the day. Someone had come in while they were working and added wood. The fire was going again. The room was warm. He said, "If the stories were wrong about this, what else were they wrong about?" Richter didn't answer. He lay back on his bunk and looked at the ceiling. It was a large question. He was not ready to answer it yet. He suspected it would take longer than 1 day in an American camp to answer it properly. But the stove was burning, and the blanket was adequate, and outside the guard was walking his unhurried round, and none of the things that were supposed to happen had happened, and that was something. It was, he thought, quite a large something.